In this video, I'm going to be building the best 1080p gaming PC I can put together on a budget, based around the brand new RTX 3050. This is a system designed for playing the latest AAA titles at 1080p high settings, and achieving some really solid frame rates. With 16 gigs of RAM, a new 12th gen Core i5 and lots more goodies, this build is not messing about. Let's do this. The Corsair iQ 5000T provides the ultimate in airflow, RGB lighting and mounting compatibility for PC builds in 2022. With 3 alloy fans included, 160 addressable RGB lights in the front, roof and floor panels, Corsair have really taken things up a notch. Learn more about the awesome 5000T in our build videos over on the channel or at the where to buy links in the description below. Now I'm going to kick this build off by looking at this. Now, to the untrained eye, this is a plain white box, but to the tech nerds among us, this is an MSI MAG B660 Tomahawk. Now, you might be wondering, James, why is this in a white box? To be honest with you, I don't know. I think it might have been an RMA sample that got sent back that then MSI reshipped out for this video, but either way, it's a great B660 motherboard. This board will form the basis of our system, with plenty of VRM cooling for a bit of CPU overclocking, Gen 4 NVMe support, and a really solid rear I/O that includes 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, and of course our 10 gigabit USB Type-C. Perhaps most crucially though, it supports the i5-12400F, our CPU choice for today's build, and Intel's definitive return when it comes to a budget gaming chip that performs very well. With 6 cores and 12 threads and a boost clock speed that well surpasses the 4.4 GHz mark, it ticks the multi-threaded and the single-threaded boxes nicely, giving plenty of performance for all of the biggest titles. For this stage, you want to line up the triangle on the CPU with the triangle on the bottom left corner of your motherboard socket. What we're then going to do is take the retention arm, pull this out and upwards, essentially freeing the socket. You can see here now, the socket is not being held down by anything. We're then going to use our finger to pull the socket up, locate those triangles, as I say, align them up, and then drop the processor in. Once you've done that, you're then going to use your own force to push the socket down, push the tab down, and the black plastic cover will pop off. Keep that one later on if you have to RMA your motherboard or anything like that. Then just make sure that your socket cover is nicely seated, apply a solid amount of pressure, and the processor is installed. Now for the next step, we're going to move on to the RAM. And for the RAM in this build, I've picked up a kit of Corsair's Vengeance DDR5. Now you might see here it says 32 gigabytes. James, isn't that overkill? Yes. I'm only recommending you pick up a 16 gig kit, and we'll only be testing with 2 of these DIMMs, ensuring that our results are conducive with a 16 gig config. Pull back your retention clips on your RAM DIMM slots and slide your DIMMs in. Apply a bit of pressure and you'll get that nice satisfying click sound. If you want to save a bit of cash, MSI and all the other main board manufacturers do offer DDR4 boards as well, which are definitely worth looking at. But for this build, I think DDR5 is going to give us a nice performance edge and help us to future-proof things for later on. For the next stage of the build, we're going to install the storage. Now, to install the storage, you need to pick up one of these. Not specifically a large multi-bit screwdriver set, but a teeny tiny screwdriver, one that's smaller than your regular Phillips head, as installing the M.2 drives means dealing with these really small fiddly screws, which can be challenging. What we're going to go ahead and do is remove the top M.2 sort of heat spreader or heat sink. These exist because some of the latest M.2 drives do run quite hot and do require some additional cooling over their base designs. But our unit today isn't one of them, as the XPG Spectrix S20G is my choice. This is a drive that we've looked at over on our website, GeekaWhat.com, and it's a drive that provides all the performance that we need. It runs on the Gen 3 standard, so isn't as quick as the newer Gen 4 drives out there, but is a lot cheaper because of it. So there's a bonus there. Now, as you'll see from the M.2 slot, if we look just here, this actually incorporates a toolless design, where we simply use this plastic tab instead of a screw. Or at least that's the theory. We're going to slide the drive in at a 45-degree angle and then push it down. And then I'm just going to see, there we go, we move the tab sort of to face the MSI logo, spin it round, and that seems to be holding nice and securely. And with that, the M.2 storage is installed as well. Once that's done, we can move on to the final component that we're going to deal with while the board is still outside of the case, and we'll look at the case choice in just a moment. First, it's time for the cooler, and I've picked up this, the Cooler Master Hyper 212 RGB Black Edition. Now, if I could count on my fingers the number of times I'd use this cooler, I simply wouldn't have enough fingers. It's been that many times. You can check out a wide range of content on the channel featuring this cooler. It's a really great shout, and for around $30–35 will keep your processor nice and chilly without breaking the bank. Installing any cooler is often a complex and convoluted task that, for a first-time builder, can be super intimidating. But don't worry, I'm going to try and break the process down for you step by step. And the first of those steps is to take this, the included backplate. Now on the backplate, you'll find yourself having 8 different mounting brackets, 2 on each corner. We want to use the outermost of these and add in these silver posts that come included in your CPU cooler's box. We'll get a nice close-up shot of these as well for you guys to feast your eyes upon. We're then going to flip the motherboard round to the other side and drop these silver posts through the rear holes on the back of the motherboard. These will then poke out around the CPU in just a moment. You may find yourself needing to adjust the location of the screws up and down on that bracket accordingly. But once you've done so, they'll then poke through the other side of the motherboard. And you can see here, we've got 1 on each corner. They stand out quite well on this silver board too. You're then going to grab these. Now these are some sort of female-to-female posts or stoppers that will go as far as holding the backplate into place. One of these is going to go on each corner around our i5 12400F. Nice and simple so far, right? Just a lot of steps, so just take it step by step. Don't try and rush it, because then you will make mistakes. If it doesn't feel right with the cooler, it's probably not right, is the easiest way of putting it. You then want to remove the cooler itself from the included box, take off the included cooler fan too, and just leave yourself with the actual heatsink. These heat pipes at the bottom will disperse the heat through the actual heatsink itself, cooling the processor. The next challenge is actually getting it mounted so that it doesn't just fall off willy-nilly. And that's where some of these included brackets come into play. These brackets right here will actually install onto the bottom plate of the cooler itself, and then those screws will pop into the female-to-female posts around the processor. Nice and easy, so just secure these down with a screw each, add a drop of the included thermal paste onto the processor, and then secure the cooler down. We'll add the fan back onto the cooler later, leave this off for now, as it will make the next step much easier. And that next step is moving the motherboard into the case. And our case for this build is the Cooler Master HAF 500. A so-called homecoming classic. Now this is a full-size ATX case that's got loads and loads of airflow and is going to look frankly awesome for this build. It is slightly overkill, but with the price of cases at the moment on the whole, you're not going to pay much more for this than you are more budget options. But you can check out a video we made covering the best PC cases to buy in 2022 if you'd like something a different colour with more or less RGB, or something cheaper or more expensive. Now, I'll be the first to admit that I haven't been a massive fan of everything Cooler Master have been doing recently. I think their component side has been a bit weaker than in the past, but this is definitely an exception, with these really nice fans at the front and a mesh panel that really lives up to Cooler Master's HAF high airflow range's name. Plus, with one sickle fan at the rear, another pointed up for air towards our graphics card, and a tempered glass side panel, it ticks all the boxes. Talking of panels, we're going to take all the panels that we can off, including both our front glass and rear steel side panels. Then we're going to lay the case down flat on the table to allow us to install the motherboard into the chassis. Before going all gonk-ho and whacking a load of screws in, you first need to locate all of your motherboard standoff holes. These are the only holes on the motherboard that go straight through and are large enough for a screw. And handily, MSI have indicated them with massive avoid collision markers on each one. So 3 at the top, 3 along the middle, and 3 across the bottom. We've essentially got to make sure these line up with the corresponding standoffs in the case. 3 at the top, 3 along the middle, and 3 across the bottom. If they're not in the right locations, now is the time to move them. And if you don't, you can create some huge problems with your motherboard grounding out against the case, which you definitely don't want. We're going to slide the board in. At this stage, you can install an I/O shield if you've got one, but our motherboard's is built in, so no stress there. We can then screw the motherboard in through all these 9 screw holes and finish things off by adding on our cooler's fan back into place. And once that's done, it's looking pretty good. I'm liking the colour scheme. I'm liking the all black gunmetal grey aesthetic. It's looking very solid indeed. And then we can take the opportunity to move on to the GPU. our penultimate component today. Now, it's worth addressing the rather large elephant in the room. And that elephant is not me, oh no, it's the graphics card industry right now. GPU prices have been falling, hallelujah, and stock and availability is improving. Now, I can't speak for every single nation in the world, but here in the UK, what my friends in the US tell me, the situation's getting a lot better. Take a look at eBuyer here in the UK. They've got a number of 3050s available for, to be honest with you, not that much more than the £300 mark. And it's so much more than just a stopgap measure. If 1080p gaming is what you're after, there isn't really any better card on a budget. Now, I've gone ahead and picked up MSI's Gaming X version, but to be honest with you, any 3050 you can find from any reputable board partner is what I go for. It's a really well proportioned card too, which helps, and it should look good in our system. It shouldn't look too lost or too small, but equally it's not going to push the size limits either. What we're going to do is we're going to hover the GPU over the top PCIe slot, and that will then indicate to us which of the rear PCIe covers, that's these things over here, need taken out. By the looks of things, we need to remove the second and third. Then we can slot the GPU in, screw it down with the two screws we took out with the removal of those PCIe covers, and that's pretty much it. The component that's going to enable our cables and wiring is the next part. Cooler Master's MWE 650 Gold, a 650 watt power supply with all the plaudits that we need. The 80 plus gold interface makes sure that we've got lots and lots of efficiency, helping to keep our power overheads and wastage down. You've also got a fully modular interface, allowing you to only plug in the cables you really need. And for this build, we'll be plugging in a motherboard, CPU, and GPU power connector to the power supply first. And we're then going to plug these up to the motherboard, starting with the motherboard power connection first up on the right hand side, the CPU power connection which goes to the top left and is made of 8 pins or 4+4 pins, and of course our GPU power connector, a 6+2 pin PCIe add-on that goes onto the graphics card. We're also going to finish things off by plugging up the front panel connections, which includes a Type A USB 3 front panel port. This is the largest of the front panel cables and is quite delicate. A USB-C connection, which is a bit more chunky, a bit more square, but once again isn't the most robust of connections, so be careful. HD audio, otherwise known as our combo headphone and mic jack, and of course the power button, which goes to the JFP1 cables on the bottom right. Once you've done all that, we're ready to boot the system up for the first time and check out the performance in a wide range of titles. Everything from Fortnite, Apex, Valorant and Warzone to Halo Infinite and Battlefield 2042. Before that though, we ought to see how good the PC looks with all its beautiful RGB in an epic glam montage. I'll see you in a second, but first, roll that montage. Awesome stuff. Now that we've seen just how good this system looks when it's all powered up, it's time to check out the performance. We've tested a wide range of titles as usual, ranging from GTA 5 to Battlefield 2042 and Fortnite. On your screen now is a summary of all the results we're able to gather, but as usual we're going to dig in deeper detail title by title, starting things off with Grand Theft Auto. Here we tested at 1080p high settings and managed to pull in just shy of 150 frames per second, with 136 and 120 for the 90 and 99th percentiles, giving us some nice consistent frame rates. In Battlefield 2042 at 1080p high we enabled DLSS, Nvidia's fancy AI-backed resolution scaler, and pulled in 107 frames per second on average. The game visually looked great, and this is a really playable frame rate. Anything above 100 for a first-person shooter is absolutely perfect. Next up is COD Vanguard, the latest COD title on the block, and here we looked again at 1080p high settings with DLSS enabled, set to performance mode this time. We pulled in over 120 frames per second, and once again, 90 and 99th percentile results were consistently strong. Next on the list is Forza Horizon 5, a game where we tested at 1080p high settings using the in-game high preset. We didn't quite surpass the 100 frames per second mark, but 96 was where we sat, with 92 and 80 for the 90 and 99th percentiles. Moving on to Apex Legends next up, at 1080p high, we managed to get 132 frames per second, Apex tends to cap out around 140, so for me this was a really solid figure, and proves the 3050's immense power at 1080p gaming. Moving on to Valorant next up, here we tested at 1080p high settings once again, and this time frame rate was definitely not an issue. 370 frames per second, not an issue to be precise. The frame rate was really solid, and stayed consistently above 300 FPS throughout, which was great to see. The penultimate title on the list is COD Warzone, and we're going to move on to Fortnite shortly afterwards. Here we tested once again at 1080p high settings and managed to achieve 90 FPS. Anything above 60 at 1080p high is a good result, so I was pleased with our Warzone performance overall, as I have been with this whole 3050 build to be honest. MSI have done a great job with their board partner 3050 card, and it really shows. The final game then is Fortnite at 1080p competitive settings, basically low with everything tuned down to low but the render distance set to far. We managed to achieve 190 FPS. More than enough frame rate to feast your eyes on for competitive titles. And with that, that pretty much wraps it up. If you enjoyed this one, make sure to get subscribed. Thanks for tuning in. And as always, we'll see you in the next GeekaWhat video.